All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give people just a few seconds to join. Maybe while we're doing that, I'll ask you to drop the World Cup team that you're rooting for in the Q&A, just to start warming up the machine here. And Dickon, maybe I'll pick on you and Magda. Tell us, who are you guys rooting for? There's a lot of soccer in our house this weekend.
I have to say, it's got to be "Come On Ye England." As a home supporter, I've been very excited, as are my little boys. So England is number one, but also excited for America. We saw a great performance on Friday night.
Yeah. And when does
Yeah.
England play?
Wednesday afternoon, 4 p.m. against
Okay.
Czech Republic. Really,
All right.
really sorry, against Croatia. Sorry, big game.
Magda, who are you rooting for?
Well, Team USA all the way. I have dual citizenship, and Team Poland did not qualify. They almost made it. We're close, but that doesn't count. Obviously, amazing game, amazing first game. So lots of hopes and lots of excitement.
Yes, I'm a huge sports fan, but I don't know a whole lot about soccer, but I understand 5 goals in one game is a pretty big deal. So I caught a good one on Friday night. Well, thanks, guys. And it's fun to see what everyone's cheering for here in the chat. So keep dropping in your favorite country or teams. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks, everybody, again, for joining us. We're here to talk about how to compare solutions. I was thinking about this session as I was prepping, and when I had my kids some years ago, we wrote a values statement for our kids and kind of just trying to highlight the things that we think are important. And one of those things is learn how to ask good questions. It just can take you very far in life if you have that skill. And so that was kind of the backbone of this session. I was very excited to be able to host it. And Dickon and Magda, thank you both so much for joining us for this one. I'm going to start by asking you guys to introduce yourselves with a little bit of your background, and then we're going to jump into 30, 45 minutes of just talking about, you've heard the presentations, you've seen the demos, you've met the teams. How do you cut through all the noise and really make a decision that you're going to feel confident about and can take back to your teams and feel like it's going to really, really make a difference on your health plan and the benefits that you're able to offer your folks? So with that, if we can go, let's see, I'm in charge of the slides here. I'm going to go to the next slide and we'll do some introductions. Magda, can I ask you to introduce yourself and just share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you for having me here, Shelley, and nice to see you, Dickon, on the other side of the screen here. Magda Rysinowski, I'm a Vice President at Business Group on Health. I have been doing the work at the Business Group on Health in support of our members and in support of the employer community for the last 8 years, focusing on topics related to healthcare cost and delivery, and generally speaking, focusing on the US environment, although lots of exciting stuff happening globally as well. And my background, by training, finance and accounting, but that's kind of long gone. I was on the employer side prior to joining Business Group on Health. So I was actually in the seat. I was one of the employers that were trying to evaluate, implement, and then maintain the relationships with many wonderful vendor partners.
That's great. You have such a good kind of 360-degree view of that experience. So I know you're going to add a lot of value here today. Thank you, Magda, for joining us. Dickon.
Yeah, that creates a lot of noise, for sure.
You can tell us a little bit about your background.
So started life as a strategy consultant, formative years, went into early stage investing for a little bit before I joined then Big Health, which is when I first met Magda. I think I was one of those many people who was looking to get to know her well in her seat as a purchaser. Company Big Health, Sleepio, and Daylight were the two solutions, focusing on digital therapeutics for insomnia, anxiety, and depression. That was before I went into the world of upstart PBMs for a short period, saw that world, very different evaluation process, interesting challenges to look at as you try and evaluate the world of PBMs. Before joining Lantern, where I've led the commercial team for a number of years across a whole host of different things and spent a lot of time thinking about the evaluation process.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Well, thank you both for being here. Excited to jump in here. And my name is Shelley Towns. I serve as the Chief Marketing Officer at Lantern. And I get the pleasure today of just trying to keep up with these two and facilitate a great conversation our goal throughout this hour is that you leave with, 2 or 3 very actionable takeaways that you could take back to your teams and really feel like you can apply to some of the decisions that you're being asked to take, and just, again, to have that confidence to take those decisions back to your team. So let's jump in. Well, first, oh shoot. Oh, there, I did what I wasn't supposed to do. I skipped twice. We'll skip the poll. We'll come back to it. So again, when we're going to jump in here, for a lot of folks, they're right in the midst of decision season. They've spent the last few months doing their diligence. They've heard lots of pitches. They've attended lots of events. They've had all of the conversations with the various teams. They've seen a lot of great slides and probably heard some great stories. Dick, and I'll start with you. Putting yourself in the mind of the buyer that's on the panel today, or in the audience today. What are some things that they should be thinking about to really try to cut through maybe some of the pitch and really get into the substance of what they're hearing?
Yeah, I think it's always important for the buyers and consultants to realize that the typical process that is run is normally somewhat relatively standard, and so therefore the vendors should be extremely well prepared in terms of the answers, and they've thought about the questions, they've prepared diligently, they're preparing the answer that they want you to hear, and that is going to point you in a certain direction and take you on a certain journey, and that is the sort of the perfect journey that they want you to go on, and they'll show everything in a good light. The key thing is always, how do you disrupt that flow to really get to the crux of what the result will be like for you? What will the experience be like for your members? And ultimately, how many people are going to use the service? And in what way are they going to use the service? And what are the outcomes they're going to get? And getting into the granularity of those answers, I think, is really important in the conversation live, to see how the vendor reacts in the moment to those questions. So as you hold those finalist meetings, making sure that you've got very specific questions to ask during the actual meeting to understand how well does the team know the details behind the answer, the sort of presentation they're giving, because that will give you a really good understanding of how common knowledge that is within the company. But then at the same time, trying to get down into the depths of understanding the details of what is the usage going to be like? What is the engagement through the process like? What are the outcomes, and what's the spectrum of outcomes? And I'm a big believer of the more detail you can get to in those answers, the more specificity you can get from the vendor, the greater confidence you've got that you will actually get those results, versus the perfect vision of what the future looks like. And also trying to distinguish between what is real today and been delivered thousands of times versus what is future state and a great vision but actually hasn't been delivered yet at scale, because understanding the separation between those is really important.
Yeah. I think so. I'm a journalist by trade. And so one of my cheat codes, especially when you get into some of the big data sets and some of the storytelling with savings and projections, I always like to ask what's in the numerator and what's in the denominator, because it just kind of cuts right to some of that packaging, like you mentioned. What do you think about a question like that for benefits buyers who may be feeling a little bit on their heels when they get into some of those big data sets? What are some questions like that they could ask?
I think it's always really critical people understand the data that's being supplied to them. And so the numerator denominator question is really important. When you think about, hey, what percentage of the population are you going to engage? Well, what are you defining as the eligible population, right? Understanding, is it everybody? Is it a subset of the population, or is it a subset of that population you think it is? So for example, when it comes to diabetes, is it somebody with a certain A1C level that you're actually talking about? Because again, you could be treating the sort of relatively actually not in trouble, not severe group, could be mild. It's a bit like an anxiety and depression. You treating mild, moderate, severe, moving different groups of those is really important versus general depression or anxiety or insomnia. And it's the same when it comes to, are we talking about surgery? Are we talking about MSK? Are we talking about joint replacements? Are we talking about joint revisions, right? The specificity of that is really important. And I think you see that across the board. So understanding that to be able to place it in context to then get to the impact is critical.
Yeah, that's good. Magda, I know you like to take more of a philosophical approach at this point. Share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I know Dickon comes to this conversation with a lot of specificity. He already used the word twice, and I'm going to be counting throughout this webinar. And that's because he and Lantern, right, they have been in the seat of answering the difficult questions and answering very specific questions for a long time. From my vantage point, my seat is, Business Group on Health is a convener. It's a multi-stakeholder convener. And it's a very privileged vantage point because I hear every day kind of what employers are struggling with. And I know they're asking a lot of hard questions because they live in the environment right now that not only where not only their decisions are high stakes because of high cost, but also they're asking those questions against the backdrop of increasing abundance of point solutions. And they are trying, and they know enough because the environment is very dynamic and unstable. We see how rapidly things are changing. And we also know how long it takes to implement any particular solution. That the decisions they are making today cannot be solutions to yesterday's problems. They are building for tomorrow in the environment that's highly uncertain. So that's why the maybe more philosophical answer here is that data is important, but so are the feelings. The feelings about the solution itself, its agility. We hear a lot lately about accountability, transparency, and trust. How willing is the vendor to be accountable, to be held accountable for the results that they promised, and how well they can adapt, how agile they are, not only to the evolving needs of my members as an employer, but also to the changing healthcare environment. Everybody is investing, everybody's competing with one another. I think it's important to understand where the solution is going. We're seeing a trend that solution maybe started as diabetes solution, now looks at the whole spectrum of cardiometabolic health, right? And as they expand and as they set their sights on the future, maybe broader set of the conditions, ask and understand that strategy. Because again, you're not implementing for 1 year. You're probably going to be with this vendor for multiple years, and taking something away from your members is a lot harder than giving them something that something new. So understand your vendor strategic pathway, and then understand if they expand and if they continue on this pathway, is it going to create a duplication of value for you? Is it going to create a point that actually your members are going to be confused because they may have two solutions that sound and feel the same? So I would say the hardest question should be rooted in your own ecosystem and in your anticipation of the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dickon, please.
No, I was going to jump in on a couple of things that Magda said there, because I think they're really good points. I think the first is this question of transparency. I think it's so critical in today's world, especially we now have legislation like no gag law, makes it really clear from an ERISA standpoint, we have to share the data. It should be a question up front, and you should get that validation that you will get full transparency from your vendors in terms of the data. Ultimately, we think about it, it's your data. You should have full visibility into that so you can validate the work that we do, any vendor does. And that should just be an upstart question as a point of entry, certainly from our perspective. I think the second question that Magda made is really important, which is that hopefully with most of your vendors, you're entering into what we think of as a strategic relationship, a strategic partnership, where you're going to have that debate and discussion about what does the future roadmap look like. And the natural thing is for anybody to do is when you start and deliver and you have a great relationship over a starting point, the natural thing is to ask the vendor to do more. The danger is when the vendor says yes, yes, and yes, which is they move into an adjacent space that you may already service, or they just end up doing more than they actually do today, and they lose focus. Certainly our perspective is that your ability to continue to deliver excellently requires focus, right? I think typical business logic will tell us that focus means you can deliver brilliantly. So I think that's a really important question to understand up front philosophically. When will the vendor always say yes versus when will the vendor push back and say, hey, it might not be in our best interest for us to do this thing for you, and here's why. Very transparently and candidly, because that is much harder in a interviewing evaluation process to actually say no than just to say yes.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think one of the threads I like that kind of pulls both of your points together is, to step away from that marketing pitch and to really get underneath it. You got to kind of think about what's it going to be like to live with this partner over an extended period of time. And some of that's really getting underneath the data. So Dickon, to your point, what's in the numerator denominator? You got to normalize the data sets across multiple vendors. And Magda, to your point, but trust your gut too. I mean, this is a relationship. This isn't just kind of two machines talking to each other. And so really thinking about what does that ecosystem integration look like? What are these folks going to be like when we get together, when I ask for support? I think, Dick, and another thing that you mentioned is, and we talked about this last week, was, things aren't going to always go well. And how does the partner respond when things maybe didn't go as well as what we hoped it and certainly wanted it to go? And so I think, Dick, and one of your suggestions that I think makes a lot of sense is when you're in that kind of honeymoon phase and everyone's trying to woo each other, asking about not just your kind of cherry picking these book of business, best case results, but show me by the quartiles, show me your higher performers and show me your lower performers, and help me understand what happened in each one so that I can understand what may be my role as the employer in that relationship. What can I be doing to help drive that too?
And Shelley, to that point, actually, the benefit team that sits in those conversations, the benefits leaders that sit in those conversations, they represent the organization with their own specific culture, and they know not only the internal values, but also what the internal stakeholders are going to be able to tolerate in terms of change. So in listening to answers, in listening to pitches, they need to figure out if some of those things that this vendor is going to solve for are actually going to resonate with very specific gaps that they know about that either exist or emerge in the population. And while some of this should be vetted in the initial RFP phase, it's that seeing specific signals that will resonate not only with the team in the room, but with internal stakeholders, with other divisions, and ultimately with members who are going to be asked to use that solution is super important. And last thing I would add here is that, to your point about partnership, is you need to ask what the vendor will need from you, the employer, in order to make, right? Because you will have to make asks internally. So if the success is contingent upon either certain communication strategy or certain plan design or a certain scope of rollout or speed of rollout, the employers need to know if those asks of the vendors are actually realistic and achievable within the context of their own environment and in the context of the needs of their internal stakeholders.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Magda, because again, understanding what is the incentive or requirement for a population to use a program drives huge variation results. I always think about it when I think back to the wellness programs of I'll say yesteryear, because this was very predominant in about 2014, 2015 when I was entering the employee benefit space. And the difference in utilization was dramatic. You could see a solution with 20% utilization versus 80% utilization. And it was ultimately driven by, one had an incentive program. You effectively rewarded every time you used the program or on a monthly basis, versus others which didn't. very different engagement levels. You see the same thing today in our world of, are you required to use something or is it voluntary? And understanding that really is the big driver of a difference in utilization. So understanding that, so you normalize results on that, and then align and pick your strategy, to Magda's point, because sometimes the requirement to use could be something that's completely the opposite of what your population can support, is different to your ethos, your culture. There's no way that you might do that. Or you might say, actually, no, that is exactly where we want to go, because the world is disruption is important, because otherwise I can't drive change. So again, you have to make that choice. Then you have to understand results within that. And that's where I think it's really important to understand there's an average, there's a median, and there's quartiles of performance. Understanding the full spectrum at the client level will give you the real understanding of what the results you can expect to experience are. And then you can even tease into, hey, look, I know that my population is a low utilizing population, so I'm going to be in your bottom 2 quartiles. Can you walk me through the difference of why you get people at this level? What's the difference of choices they make? Or what is different about their population, so it can help me understand my population and what the results are going to be like. That gives you a much greater sense of the impact you can expect. And that's both in terms of people you can get into the program, their usage of the program, but then your actual outcomes from an experience, clinical outcomes, savings. All of that comes from how many people start using it and then either continue to use it or don't continue to use it. And that usage piece can be so critical. And again, understanding that in detail will give you great insight of what you're going to get over the next 3 years.
So let's skip ahead to utilization. I think, I don't know if there's a more misunderstood phrase in our industry than utilization or engagement. It's so fuzzy. And if I asked folks to drop in their working model of what that means in the chat, we'd probably get 100 different answers. So let's kind of go into that a little bit more. And I think too, utilization is one of those things. If you just think about it from a usage perspective, it is relative. So Dickon, to your point, if you're talking about a wellness vendor, yeah, maybe 80% of your total population is a fair goal. You think about something like a specialty care, and 15% of your population would need specialty care and intervention. So the goal really isn't 100% of the population, but it's 80% of the 15%. And thinking about some of those goals. So you mentioned at the top of the conversation, it's about helping people. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we're all in this business to do. Is it really that simple? It's just, hey, how many people did you help? And kind of give me a number.
No, I mean, I think, and again, I think this will give you great insight. The specificity to which you can get this question answered is really important. How many people engage? And in a digital therapeutic, that might be log in, create an account, right? How many people do the first expected engagement? And then how many weeks do they do it for? How many times do they do it? What is their actual engagement that you are expecting and being shown as like, hey, when you ask someone, hey, what's the experience? You get walked through it. Great. How many people actually do that? Right? Mm-hmm. And what's the difference between the people who start and then stop versus the people who continue through? Right? Trying to understand that is important, because that framing of what is the actual, as I would describe it, sort of upfront engagement to then usage through the program, or the conversion through the program, ultimately delivers the outcomes that you're looking for. Again, the perfect outcomes that you get presented in the finalist meeting, or what needs to be true for that to happen at a level of specificity through the funnel and on an ongoing basis, ultimately determines that. So the more you can try and drive towards understanding that, the more you can believe you will get the outcomes that are being portrayed as, this is what we deliver every time.
Yeah. Magna, I know you care deeply about what the overall ecosystem looks like when it comes to driving great engagement or utilization. What's your point of view there?
Yes. So again, these solutions are not coming in into a clean sheet, so to speak. There's already typically a complex network of solution in addition to kind of the underlying health plan network and the health plan strategy and steerage that's inherent in that partnership. So, and there's also partnerships that are evolving across industry between different solutions, between navigators and solutions. Platforms are emerging. So really thinking about very early on about integration, not only how well the solution will fit into the ecosystem, how well is the partner that you're evaluating able and willing to integrate into your ecosystem, and evaluating the partnership in the context of what is your desired front door for your members, which partner of the 2 or 3 that you're evaluating will fit better if you're committed to a particular front door, because member confusion and member navigation are very, very important topics right now. And if there's somebody in employers' ecosystem that positions themselves as kind of overall amplifier of value of solutions, of value of program, again, looking for synergies between that party and the solution you're implementing is important. But if we talk about utilization and engagement, especially when we are talking about, ultimately, will your members engage is going to be contingent of whether they see value in it. And the first element of value is cost for them. So will your members be able to afford it? What incentives are you prepared to give them in order to use this program? And how well understood these incentives and how visible they're going to be for your members, right? So things as, lower copay for virtual visit, back to the COVID days, it took a while to explain all of that. So thinking about the first step of utilization is question for the member of what's in it for me and how much it will cost me. So not only who will tell me about it, how visible will the solution be through my front door, but also how visible and real the incentives will be. And I think you said earlier, Dickon, here about how will the solution help members. Members have different needs. There are different outcomes that different people are looking for, depending on what the particular program is doing. To what extent is the solution able to personalize the offering? And to what extent I, the employer, am open to the fact that it's not going to be one size fits all approach to care delivery, if you offer care delivery, but also communication. I remember many years ago in the employer seat, the conflict that I experienced by trying to personalize the engagement, but also the communications team being used to the fact that we review every message. It's impossible to have both, right? So considering those trade-offs as you think about and personalizing this, engaging with this solution in a way that it can personalize the offering to the specific segments of your populations that you're hoping will use it is important.
You would something near and dear to our heart. We absolutely think a lot about that. You're right.
Yeah, I was going to say that the question of personalizing and the review process is going to become increasingly hard as we think about the way AI is going to communicate with us. Like, all we can do is set guardrails and then let it play out. And I think that evolution is going to be a fascinating one from a communication standpoint. Maggie, you said something that I really appreciated of when employers have got a philosophy about their ecosystem and a way they want people to engage, one of the questions is, how is the different solution going to engage and integrate in that setup? I think that's a really important question. I think there's also a question that's not often asked is, when you look at those integrations, I think one of the big questions is, when you ask your vendors of them, how do you avoid the tick box? Oh, yes, I integrate. Okay, can you walk me through the details of how that works and how many people use the integrations that you've built, and give me a couple of case studies examples so you can validate, and I can go to the vendor partner and validate that X number of people have actually taken the referral from A to B. Because I think it's very easy for people to say, oh, we integrate. And I think that level of depth of integration that really drives change is too often I think, presented as a beautiful picture versus a true reality of how those integrations work. And I think that's an important piece, again, to your point, Shelley, of getting to the specificity of it. Show me the results. And I think you may end up getting different answers sometimes.
Yeah, I think a great example of that is a partnership we'll announce later this week around primary care and just the value of somebody who has an advanced primary care solution combined with a specialty care solution, and those two channels working together. The value of that trusted referral coming directly into something like a specialty care or a mental health for that matter. You just see this elevation of conversion, like you mentioned, through that funnel because of that kind of ingrained trust in the reference. So just a really good example of two partners, I think, working really collectively together.
Yeah,
and reducing friction for the member, which is ultimately what we want to do.
And we'll be talking about that later this week. We're excited about it. But I mean, that has been a executive leadership-led partnership and integration to show the depth of work that needs to be done to drive the changes to make it impactful. So again, I think that doesn't always happen. And I think it's really important to try and understand that, because that's where then the expectation of what the employer is looking for is happening. So
great. All right. Well, we're going to go into savings. I will reference. We're going to follow up with everybody with a download toolkit to give you some templates to help you do some of that normalization, like we were talking about. Utilization rate, again, those definitions are fuzzy. The calculations are fuzzy. This is a great example of where you can say what's in the numerator, what's in the denominator. Show me the quartiles. Hey, you're using average, they're using median. Why are you doing that? So we've got some great, very simplified toolkit worksheets to help you try to kind of do an apples to apples comparison. So we'll send those along after this webinar. But while we tee up the savings conversation, I'm going to put a poll up here. How confident are you that the vendors you're talking to are going to provide the savings results that you expect? So give us a sense for your level of confidence there, and then we'll start up the next section here. All right, seeing a good number come through. All right, Magda, maybe not too surprising, 40% are somewhat confident. So I know you and the business group on health, you guys see a lot of different savings models. You've had lots of conversations. And of course, as you said, you've been on both sides of this table. What are a couple questions that you recommend employers asking to really pressure test the savings projections that they're being shown?
Yeah, my answer would have been depends on the vendor and which area of spend they're trying to impact. Because, and I learned that word from Dickon, impactable, right? Employers may wish to do a lot of things, but they really need to focus on what they and their vendor partners can most easily impact directly, and how that, and is this the area of significant costs where costs truly can be reduced without generating higher costs elsewhere. So total cost of care is something, it's a buzzword that I think we need to pay attention to, like looking, because if every solution delivers a savings, we should have negative trend, right? We've said it over again.
Very true.
Total cost of care and questions that give employer visibility to what the impact across their all areas of their cost will be is important. But first, let's start with questions that give employers sitting in the room confidence that the math is mathing. Sometimes, and we see it a lot in the pharmacy space, right? You can get tangled up in really complex definitions, things that are not super intuitive. And if you can't get it from that meeting and from that finalist presentation, you won't be able to explain it internally, and you won't be able to hold your vendors accountable. So the math just needs to make sense. And savings in this environment, savings need to be significant and measurable enough, because the cost of implementation, that's back to your nominator and the denominator, the cost of implementation is significant. The opportunity cost is always high, and that's not only opportunity cost of focusing your your team members' attention on specific implementation, but also your members' attention, your actual employees who are potentially, there's a finite number of things you'll be able to communicate them. So savings need to be not just a little bit, they need to be really, really impactful for you to make the decision that it's worth causing that, that it's worth for you to go ahead with this program. Asking questions about whether the solution has been validated by the third party. Was there has their savings methodology been validated by independent actuaries? What else? Alignment of incentives. That's always a good foundation for delivering savings. If the success of your vendor is tied to your success, and there's a lot that we can say about that, it's usually a great signal that this will be a successful program. But if you're sitting in a conversation where the vendor that's selling a solution to you is possibly going to make money, should make money on this new implementation, and you are going to gain significant savings, who makes less? Right? In the world of limited research, or in the very connected ecosystem, who are the losers? Apparently, there is an opportunity here to capture, which is why you're talking to this vendor. How long will this window of opportunity be open? And will the other elements of the ecosystems adapt and adjust to kind of close that window of opportunity? So is the solution rooted in just delivering better health? Or are you looking in, that depends. You might be looking temporarily to capture a very significant window of opportunity and savings. And again, that happens a lot in the pharmacy space. And I would also ask questions that will be rooted in your strategic timeline as an employer. So if your RFP timeline is that this year you're evaluating an MSK solution or a cancer solution, but next year your big project is really to take a look at the health plans and consider alternative health plans. Mm-hmm. Will this solution work as you don't just evaluate the solution in the context of behavior of members in high deductible plan that might be prevalent today. If you next year are going to move to primary care first or copay only plan structure, or a vendor that might already have some of those capabilities built into that program. So back to that kind of duplication of value. So will your savings sustain in your future structure that you might be open moving to with some of the vendors that impact broader area of spend, such as health plans and PBMs. Last word on pharmacy being such a key driver of cost these days for employers. It's not lost on me that the greatest interest in point solutions right now among employers is in the areas that are associated with high drug spend. Cancer, autoimmune, digestive health, right? We're seeing interest because it's impactable. Employers want the way to spend less money is to some extent managing the pharmacy cost better. Ask questions also have to do with what is anticipated in drug pipeline, in ability to impact the site of care of medication. So take into account not only the cost savings on the medical side, also the pharmacy side as you're evaluating the saving claims.
Great points.
Magda, you made so many points in there. I just, sorry, Shelley, I'm going to jump in on a couple here. So, sorry, I think there was some amazing points in here. One is, just overarchingly think about the savings. One of the first pieces in that is get people to use the program. RCTs, are they validating that? And I think one of the things that anybody who spends a lot of time in clinical trials understands is the utilization of a randomized controlled trial is not what I would call the utilization in the real world. Understanding the difference between those two, really important. It gets back to normalizing the data. In a randomized controlled trial, you typically have people following up on a very consistent basis. That means usage is higher, and it's both in terms of getting people in and then ongoing usage. And that ultimately drives your outcome. So recognize that it validates that if people do the thing, you get the savings because that has been randomized and compared. But it doesn't necessarily validate that you get the usage that you get in a randomized controlled trial. So those are two different contexts, really important to understand. So it gets back to understand usage in the real world, your context, your setting, with the parameters that you want to put in around usage, be it incentivized, required, or just made available. And then how you're communicating and awareness becomes that critical factor. So I think that's the usage part of the savings. The second bit is validating the savings methodology, right? And I think that bit is again really important. How you're doing that, you comparing it to the literature and referencing a model versus if you validated it. Are you getting it validated by independent third parties? Then I think an important question is, what's the data for? And how was that data collected? Is it truly sort of independent third party collected, or is it supplied? Because if it's supplied, you've got a question of the data being supplied, to what extent you're validating it. The same as a savings methodology. If there's always a key set of assumptions in there that you've got to really understand. Because, for example, if it's, I'm going to change this clinical outcome is to drive savings, are you comfortable with the assumption being made on if that clinical change happens at outcome, the savings happens? Because that savings piece has a timeline associated to it. So to Magda's other point, what is your strategic timeline? Do I need to hit savings this year, 18 months, or is it 3 years? Very, very important in terms of how you select the solutions you're going to focus on, right? Every buyer is in a different place. Some people have really low turnover and can think about population health, changing behavior to drive better outcomes. Others have to go, hey, look, I've got to deliver a change in 12 months. That's my mandate. And then they've got a different set of options to consider. And then I think equally, to Magda's point of, if savings is going to happen, who makes less and why? And is that 100% achievable? I get the theory, but actually, can you show me you've delivered it again and again? Because some of those things are different. We all know the incentives. If someone's saving, someone's losing. Who's that person losing? And how do you make sure that they're going to be comfortable losing versus just accepting it on paper? Because again, those are important aspects as you try and understand and really plan for the change that you're going to get. Go for a long time on this one.
It's going to be a good recap section there. All right, we're almost done here. We're going to switch over to Q&A with just 2 more questions. The first one is, when you think about comparing and trying to normalize the sets, I think both of you I've heard made this point, and I think it's one that was really popular in our specialty care summit earlier this year, where disruption really is the goal. It's no longer being considered a risk to avoid. And, I think as Nate from Amtrak told us, the status quo is actually more disruptive than some of these changes that we're considering. So, Dickon, if people change the kind of their mindset to actually prioritize some disruption, what does that open up? What does that make possible now for the buyer as they're thinking through some of these options?
Yeah, I think it's also understanding what is the spectrum of disruption. I think we think about disruption a lot today in terms of it's either it's going to hit a lot of people or it's going to hit fewer people, but real pain and friction. And understanding what's your philosophical comfort with that, alongside what are the savings you're delivering and what's the impact of that savings. Because for some people, we have a great example of a population where they've said, hey, look, I'm going to disrupt the experience for a tiny percentage of the people, so everybody else on the plan benefits with lower premiums and lower cost share, because that's what we want. We want greater affordability, and so we're going to make it harder for a few people because we believe this is much more important, which is to help lots of people. That's different to, I think, how a lot of people think on a sort of annualized basis. And I think it's a great reframe of like, hey, if a few people have to do something different, I can help a much broader percentage of the population be able to afford their care more, right? Because I think affordability of care is such a challenge in today's society, but it's also one of the hardest ones to impact, given the employer's paying more, but then also the member is. So that's often how we like to reframe it. But I also equally, if you're going to make that change and you're going to create disruption, how can you mitigate the disruption by improving the experience of that member through that period, right? So I think how you can think about managing that is really important. And then can you, if you're going to make that change, talking to others that have done that, got to the other side of it. And then the question is, hey, would you do that again, right? Is that something that you ultimately think is a positive change that you've made? Because once you're on the other side of it, you're less close to the sort of exact experience of that disruption that I think was once described to me as, hey, Dickon, the reason why I never want to change PBM is it's the first phone call I get on New Year's Day morning when something doesn't work, because it hits everybody on the plan immediately. So again, I think those are the things that you need to understand as you go through it. But Magda's lived this much more than I have, so I'm curious, have you?
We love the topic.
Yeah, go ahead.
We love the topic of disruption. In fact, we have a great thought leadership piece on our website that's open to all on disruption in today's environment. I said earlier the savings have to be significant. I would argue that it's impossible to achieve significant savings without disrupting members. And our definition of disruption is should evolve. Because we often talk about disruption as, oh, you'll have to change the provider. Well, if you're implementing a center of excellence strategy, and if you, the very core, the very reason for this is because you want members to change the provider, you want them to go to the provider that you have validated with your vendor actually delivers better outcomes. That is good disruption. And the current environment that members navigate is nothing but disruptive. It's unpredictable for them from the cost perspective, it's disruptive from the access perspective. So being afraid of disruption is being afraid of change for better. And that's just something we really are talking a lot to members, being bold, being disruptive, and reframing disruption also for your internal stakeholders so it doesn't become the barrier to implementation. The other point here on the disruption that I would like to make is directing with point solution and contracting with point solutions is like direct contracting to some extent with providers, to the extent providers that are affiliated with that solution are actually delivering care. And if you as an employer want to disrupt how healthcare is delivered or influence the member experience in the actual care delivery setting, whether virtual or in person, your best ability to do that is actually in discussions and in choosing partners that are philosophically aligned with you, whether it's in the area of advanced primary care or in center of excellence or in clinical specialty solution like digestive health solution, to make sure that the experience these providers are delivered, even if the member has to change a provider to do that, is actually the experience you want your member to have.
Great. All right, I'm going to ask people to drop their questions in the Q&A box there on the screen. And while folks are doing that, Dickon and Magda, I'm going to ask you guys one more question. So, okay, we've gone through all the pitches, we've heard the stories, we've taken some of your advice here with these questions to really try to get underneath and have a real apples to apples comparison. The last thing on my list as the buyer is I want to do a really good reference check. So what are your tricks? What have you seen? And what are some of the questions that you are just kind of like are on your go-to list to really get a solid answer versus the fluffy, hey, how's it going with them? Or did you like them? What would you recommend? Whoever wants to start.
All right,
Go ahead.
I'll jump. So I always like to ask the question of what were you promised? Did they deliver? Right? is I think that framing of, hey, you received a promise and then ultimately that delivery happened or didn't happen, I think is a critical aspect, because that ultimately means, great, what I'm being promised, I will get as well, right? Versus, no, didn't quite deliver on it, but I like them, right? And I think that that experience of the way you work with the team is really important. As Magda said, like how you feel about the team is really important. But at the same time, will they deliver on the promises that they make is, I think, so critical, because ultimately that's what you're buying, right? Like you've gone through a whole process, you've understood what is being laid out as what I should expect. Ultimately, then in the references, have they delivered on that proposition? I think is so critical.
Mm-hmm. Magna, what would you add?
I would always start asking on the call is, was your vendor willing to share data with every partner in the ecosystem that needed that data? That's the integration point. How does the vendor weigh testimonials versus data? Testimonials are great, but we're looking for significant change at scale typically. To what extent there was a alignment on communication and engagement strategy. Was the vendor unnecessarily married to their own communication channels? And did the vision of the future over time, as the ecosystem evolved, as your relationship evolved with that vendor, did your vision of the future, were you able to influence their vision for the future and vice versa, or did you grow apart? Right. So those are some of the questions I would ask, and it's just going back to a vendor being open book, being a little bit of an open book with you, and being transparent not only about the opportunities, but as challenges come, as challenges emerge due to internal or external factors, just ability to work through those together.
I think that last point you made is a great one. Is when you encounter challenges and problems, how do they respond? Is I think such a critical aspect of, hey, this thing isn't going as well as we wanted. We need to adjust course, and how somebody responds to that and rallies around it, I think, is a real testament to the partner they're going to be to you, versus give you excuses for why that's not going to happen or they can't do it.
Yep. That's a good one. I spent my first 12 years at Angie's List, and one of the best ways to find the best plumbers and roofers around the country was to see one that had a lot of really, really good reviews, but then a couple of kind of questionable ones, but to see their published response to how they handled that customer complaint, because we've all been there, it happens, and that response tells you so much. So I think that's such a great one. So we've had a couple questions come in here. There's one here, I think you could probably answer it from a couple different directions, but maybe Dick, and maybe I'll ask you to answer it from the behalf of specialty care. How much stock do you put into kind of, well, I'll call what the question is kind of referring to as like a promised roadmap. So maybe in our world, that's a network location that's going to open. For a digital tech company, maybe it's more of a product feature or service that's coming. How do you weigh the reality of that deliverable on some of maybe the savings projections that they're providing?
Yeah, I always like to think about it as if you are being promised something that is really important to you in the future, write it into the contract, right? Put some kind of guarantee behind it, because otherwise it's what it is. It's words on a slide that may come off the slide tomorrow. And I think it's really, really important to understand the commitment to the vendor to deliver something that is being proposed as maybe important and maybe part of your buying criteria. And if it is, then I think you need to get that written into the contract so that you can actually get organizational alignment behind it. Because if it is important, if you ask for it in the contract, the team then has to go and do the internal, do we have support to put this in the contract? And if they don't, and they won't guarantee it, that tells you exactly where it lies. It's a maybe. So that's how I think about managing to that. Otherwise, I think you can potentially be making decisions against something that won't necessarily happen. So that's always how I think about it as a starting point. But I'm curious, Magda, from your position, how have you managed it?
I just want to reflect on what you said, because as you were talking, I can't imagine that in this cost environment, if this is a key feature of the key feature of the program cannot be based on the future promise. If it's adjacent, if it's something that can amplify, if it's an evidence of the vendor being able to adapt to the future state, to our best prediction of the anticipated future state of the industry, that's one thing. But if the core of the solution, or if the core of the program that you're looking at is based on a promise to land a particular engagement in a particular geography, a particular contract, that's probably a red flag, and I would wait.
Yeah. Good point.
I think it's a really good point, Magda. It can be easy to promise things in the future, but if it's live today and working, that's probably your best proof of great, it'll work tomorrow. And given I need to deliver savings to my CFO tomorrow, I'd much rather on what exists versus the future.
And there's plenty of examples out there, right? And that's necessary too. So I don't want to discourage some employers who are courageous and visionaries to make an investment in co-innovation and in building something together, either with their existing partners or with a new partner. That's important too, but it can be the core of your strategy, right? Yeah. Vendors don't build solutions in a vacuum, and sometimes that co-innovation is necessary. But it's a challenging cost environment, and not a lot of people are going to give a lot of the territory when it comes to dollars. So building something new with your vendor, great. It has to be transformative, and it has to be really, really aligned with your needs.
Yeah. So future state delivery should be kind of packaged as more of an upside to a base savings projection that people are willing to kind of underwrite or put into the contract.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what Magda says there is absolutely spot on. I think there's equally an important aspect of as you do co-develop and co-invest, making sure that what you are co-developing and investing is something that the vendor is excited about for their future because they see future in it. Like, this is something we spent a lot of time thinking about with AT&T. Very candidly, they were asking us to do something that was new and different for us, and was absolutely built around how we could expand it beyond, because we believed it was a future state. But we had those very explicit conversations as we went through the process of saying, hey, how do I make this something that isn't just an AT&T solution? Because if it is, then there's a question about how I continue to support that for the next 5-10 years, versus how do I go from strength to strength versus just servicing one particular client around it. A very important client, but one client as we scale.
Great point. All right, we're right at time. We didn't get to all the questions, but we'll be sure to include those in our wrap up, along with the toolkit and some of those templates that I mentioned. But Magda, Dickon, thank you both so much for joining us. It's the exciting part of the year that I know a lot of folks are very heads down and trying to make some really good decisions. So thank you guys for your advice today. I'm sure it helped a lot of people. And we had really good attendance on the call, so very much appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody for joining us on a Monday afternoon. Have a great week, everyone.
Take care.
Be well.